All right, let's talk about the price of Chia. So, if you've been watching the market trends lately, there was a big drop in the entire market. Like we saw Bitcoin go down. It's off its high from like 106,000 to something sub 85. We saw ETH go down. Pretty much the entire crypto market was in the red, except for Chia. Chia seemed to have bucked that trend, and it was an inversion. So we saw like the entire market was down something to the tune of 8 to 10%, and Chia was up an inverted amount. So instead of going down with everything else, it went up. And I always like to zoom out. This is frequently something that people say in the world of prices and stocks and crypto. It's the zoom out. So here we're looking at a zoomed out chart of the price of Chia. So you can see, roughly a year ago we were at $50, and that little tiny blip on the very, very far right there, that is it bucking the trend. It's going up, that little bit. Lucas, I know you love looking at the price of things and talking about prices. Let's have a thoughtful discussion about this, shall we?
To our listeners, Grant was invoking a great deal of sarcasm there, but we can talk about it. As you're laying out this chart, in the first thing that pops to my mind is what an overlay also of Bitcoin would look like compared to that, because so much of crypto also follows the trend of the leader, Bitcoin. Um, and I think it we ought to bear in mind that the Bitcoin chart looks somewhat similar, maybe a later rise and also a larger magnitude, but it's been plummeting. It's at something like 85K today, down from 100.
Right, and the story here is not that everything's going down correlated. It's that Chia didn't go down in a correlated fashion. I mean, if you're to just look at the macro trends, usually what happens is crypto and the stock market and all kinds of asset prices routinely trade in a very correlated fashion. That means that if the stock market's going down, crypto is going down. And it usually follows Bitcoin. Like if Bitcoin has a big dump, everything has a big dump, and everything trades very correlated. The entire industry has been waiting for a time when this no longer occurs. If Bitcoin really is the safe haven that everybody's been talking about, then it should operate differently than the market. It shouldn't look like an asset. It should be the place people retreat to when they want less volatility or when they want to escape from, unfavorable market conditions or whatever. We don't see that. We see correlation almost always. But in Chia particularly, we've had these points where it's bucked the trend. And so I think it's worth talking about, well, what is it that might be causing Chia to have bucked this recent trend? And has it happened in the past? And what might we need to be looking for to see sustained price, appreciation in the longer term? So that's sort of some stuff that I think we need to talk about. One thing in doing a bit of research for the show that I know was pointed out, and I'm going to give the props to, I think it was Monkey Zoo that found this to begin with, but we saw this article come out where there was a small altcoin project. It isn't even named by name here. Like Chia isn't even referenced, but like all the folks here are named, and Chia Network is put in the second paragraph, but definitely not in the headline. So Chia didn't even get a headline from Crypto News, but there was a meeting that happened. They were there. They were at the table. So likely there's been some amount of excitement about Chia because they are at the table with the SEC with a bunch of other coins which have bigger market caps and higher prices and arguably more excitement than Chia. So to see them in the mix, I think was surprising for many in the crypto industry who've largely been giving Chia not much credit. So I'd say if there was anything that I saw that really was responsibility of this recent inversion and this small price appreciation in Chia, it was because of this and what's been going on with them at the SEC meetings.
Well, I think everyone in the Chia community should share a wry smile at being called a small altcoin. But in some ways, it's true. But it's also good to be getting even negative publicity is good publicity. Yeah.
Yeah, what I mean, the main thing that I find when I go out into the larger crypto spaces, talk to people and whatever, it's that Chia really hasn't been doing any marketing, and so nobody really knows about it. Calling it a small altcoin is not a terrible way to describe it in some sense. That it's not super well known. If you say you're into Chia or you're hearing about Chia, you largely have to wade through a bunch of articles that are way back from mainnet, where it's like, oh, they're eating all the hard drives and just stuff that's so old that it's hard to even keep up with it, because even if you were to do a Google search, you cannot find a lot of the articles that have been written about Chia. It's not well publicized and it's not well marketed. And so this little bit of publicity that's happening, I think, was something that started to get some of the attention of people who really haven't paid attention to Chia in the past. And so what's going on with Permuto is obviously a story. It's something that is going to be coming out. It's not something that's here today. So we are still waiting for what will eventually be this product that splits dividends and out of stocks and allows for this more substantive product on stock and will produce block space demand, but it's not here yet. And so we actually saw that Chia hit its lowest price ever. It hit like $8.50 was the most recent lowest price Chia's ever been at. And it was kind of a mad dash for a bunch of people to go buy it at that price because it was clearly undervalued at that price. But at $15, the question is it overvalued? What is its real, value at this point? I would point at an article that was written by Chia itself, which talked about what is the value of a blockchain. Like, how do you actually come up with some value for this? And this was, something that that Gene wrote. It said, what is the fundamental value of a crypto? And first off, just saying a crypto's fundamental use case is to buy block space. That is the thing that currency prices. So if you're thinking about a blockchain as a database, it has a limited amount of space in every single block. And so the currency, the L1 token, fundamentally buys you space in that database. And so if there isn't a prolonged pressure on block space, it's not clear what the value of the token really should be. It maybe should be very low if there isn't a lot of demand for block space, because that's what it fundamentally prices. And so if you think about a lot of the block space wars that happen with Bitcoin and what have you, that's what people have pointed to and said, this is why Bitcoin Cash is worth less than Bitcoin, because they substantively increased the amount of block space and there was no demand. Nobody really wanted to use it. Nobody had a good use case for it. It didn't end up being the world currency. Bitcoin Cash really isn't the most ubiquitous thing. We don't use it at coffee shops. It's not being used by substantive projects. So that's why, Bitcoin Cash, if you look at its price versus Bitcoin, it sort of fell very rapidly because it fundamentally prices something that there isn't a lot of demand for. And when we've seen prolonged demand for block space, which has happened in Chia, so in Chia, if everybody recalls, there was a period of time where there was substantive block space demand. It was during that whole inscriptions craze when inscriptions were something in Bitcoin, and then somehow it made its way onto Chia. We didn't need that because we had cats, and it was sort of very foolish that any of that occurred because we have better stuff. But it did create demand for block space, and it also meant that the mempool got just crazy large because there was so much data in there, and so it started to get to be where if you were looking at the mempool, you had to deal with megabytes and megabytes, sometimes hundreds of megabytes in the mempool, which is not the norm. So when you have block space demand, it starts to drive token price. And we definitely saw this in Bitcoin, where there was a period of time where things got kind of nutty in that same direction, where they were starting to put a lot of monkey pictures on there. People were buying blocks, and fees started to go up to where they exceeded the block subsidy. So it actually got to a point where there was big debate about whether what was happening in Bitcoin was appropriate. Like a lot of individuals in the Bitcoin community said, this monkey pictures and stuff that's happening and all these inscriptions, this is not what this is supposed to be used for. This is supposed to be a currency database, and trying to filter it out and what have you. The long story short is When there's sustained pressure for block space, you should see a rise and a sustained price appreciation in the coin. And that's really what this model is talking about, and what Chia has said about itself is this is when you should see price appreciation, is when you have sustained pressure on the block space, and when that sustained pressure on block space is long lasting. And if what they've posited is going to be the case for Permuto, I would anticipate that if those products really take off, then we will see sustained pressure on block space. And that's when you'll see price appreciation in Chia be maintained. It's not just going to be one of these blips that we've seen in the past. And really, to zoom out, we were at something $50 just a year ago. So to be at 15, this is the same old story in Chia. If you've been buying Chia, you're probably down. Most people who have bought Chia are down, and that's been the case. So we're really looking for a use case in Chia that's going to drive a lot of block space usage. It's real world use cases, so tokenizing assets, carbon market trading, anything that produces a lot of utility of the chain in a real world case, or even in these meme cases. That's a valid use of the chain, and it will produce pressure. So anything that does that should produce a sustained price. Anything that doesn't do that, then I would expect to see these sorts of things where we go up and then we revert back to the mean. And so if you see kind of what's been happening, there's a lot of people out there who just sell the Chia as soon as they get it. They just don't hang on to it. So unless you either have a lot of people who are speculating, holding on to it as a store of value, then you're probably going to see the price continuously fall because it's maintaining its market cap. We do have inflation, so the more coins that are emitted, we're going to see prices not necessarily rise until this sort of thing occurs. Does that
Well,
make sense?
absolutely. I think directing attention to block space. I mean, I'm I know you mentioned that Chia hasn't done a lot of marketing, but I think that they have done a lot of work towards ideas like Permuto and maybe the less standard crowd that's been attracted to crypto. They've been looking outside of it, because if we're going to see the value of cryptocurrencies determined by the blockchain pressure and the market that's created for once that pressure exists, then we got to have more people who are using it. So I applaud them for uh, looking for customers like Permuto, even if they have to create them, and looking towards those ideas. The other things that I think are going on that are going to have a big impact, or maybe have had a negative impact, is one, the reformatting of the plots, and two, the release of state channels. And as far as state channels go, I know Bram was in a space, I believe, last week, and was talking about some of the progress that he has made there. I didn't actually get to I didn't attend the space, but I heard about it afterwards. But I know he's getting close to releasing the state channels. Um, and ostensibly, going back to our discussion with Art a couple of months ago, we know the timeline for the the release of the new plot formats is coming. What sort of impact, or what do you think about whenever you think about those sort of impending uh, releases coming up in the Chia ecosystem?
Well, the plot format, because of the way that they said they were going to roll it out, I would expect it to be somewhat of a nothing with respect to price. I don't think it'll really adjust price at all. So it will definitely improve the overall security of the chain. I think. I don't particularly like this whole GPU thing. I think it opens up a vector of attack that is not good for the chain. The whole idea around space and proof of work is that it's difficult to come up with the thing on a short-term basis, right? It's like you can't easily go get some thing in a short-term capacity to attack the chain. I think we're in dangerous territory when we've got this compression stuff, because there are a substantive number of GPUs out there that are available on a short-term basis to attack the chain. I don't know how many GPUs you exactly need to make a dent in this, but that situation that we're in, where everybody had to upgrade to 251, that was definitely a dangerous situation and could have produced a very terrible outcome as far as all things go. Having been someone who lived through a chain collapse, like that's the kind of thing that's really scary. So being able to get access to GPUs on a short-term basis with some amount of capital and then attacking the chain and doing something extremely nefarious and horrible to the chain is a dangerous situation to be in. So what the plot format change does is puts us back into it's much harder to do something on a short-term basis because you'd have to go out and actually get space, actually allocate it, and it wouldn't be easy to just do that on a short-term basis with GPUs. So I view that as something that would be positive for the security, the longevity of the chain. But with respect to how it's going to be rolled out, it's going to be phased in over multiple years, is at least what I heard last time. So that I don't know that it's going to have much of an effect on price, but definitely is something that I'm very excited about and hopeful for. Like, I don't want to see us in the world we're in this hybrid GPU storage kind of a thing. I think that that's not what people got into Chia for, and I think that that wasn't necessarily a good development for our ecosystem. You asked about gaming. Gaming, I think, is kind of interesting. As far as the state channel thing, what I've seen in the repository so far, it's not clear that it's just state channels. Like, it's definitely a gaming product at this point. It isn't like they released a state channel repository and then built gaming on top of that. It's twined together. I don't know if there's some movement that they're going to do to try to decouple that and make it more, I don't know, reusable or something like what you know uh, our friend, the developer at Dexy, has done with his whole gaming infrastructure. But I didn't see them lay it out that way. So as far as, are we getting an L2, proper on Chia? I don't see that we've got that yet. And if Bram and Art have designs for making it more general, I think the likely outcome of having state channels and payment channels on Chia is that it could do the same thing that it did for Ethereum, which is you put a lot more pressure on the L2, and that starts to degrade pressure on the L1 to the point where it becomes less obvious that there is a need for the L1 because everybody shifts into the thing that's faster and has more space and is lower fees and whatever. So I don't know. That one's tough for me to think that that's going to really help the price of the L1, right? If you think about, you need to be in a situation where there's sustained pressure on the L1 to really have a need for an L2, because an L2 is a scaling thing. So if you don't have sustained pressure on the L1, and L2 sort of just relieves pressure on the L1 and could make the price go down even further. So I don't know that either of those things is really going to have a big impact on what we're talking about right now. That being said, I'm excited about both of those things. I really like the new plot format and the gaming payment channel, state channel stuff that's being going on with what's happening for gaming. I think both of those things are super exciting and interesting for Chia because they open big doors for other types of activities on the chain that otherwise would only move at the speed of the chain. That is very limiting for things like doing real-time gaming. Like, that just doesn't really make a whole lot of sense on the L1 because it can only move at the speed with which you can make commits on the main chain and bury things. So to have gaming on the L1 is problematic because it moves so slow. So I really like both of those things, but I'm not sure that they're going to have a positive impact on price.
Well, when I think about, we talk about the blockchain trilemma. I think in maybe there is also a corporate adoption trilemma. One being decentralization, plot formats figure importantly into that. Two being a complex ecosystem, giving anyone who's adopting a chain like the ability to move back and forth between L1 or L2. Third, there is the regulatory pressure that has been that is that's held down crypto, especially through the last administration and through any administrations before that. But we're also seeing we started this conversation with a with the small altcoin article, and that was on the heels of a meeting between Chia and the SEC, an agenda for that meeting that they had farmed for the information in that article. What do you think about Chia's relationship with the SEC, the courting of approval that they have sought, and more broadly, the the new how do I put this, the the new the new the new relationship it seems that the SEC is fostering with crypto. Uh,
I mean, this was always one of the big selling points of Chia. And I know that when I was out there working with Evergreen and was stumping for the fact that we were working with this particular chain, the fact that it could be compliant and securities compliant was a big deal for a really long time. And it was, a reason why there was this idea that the pre-farm couldn't be sold, because there was a certain understanding of what the regulatory environment looked like. What it looks like to me right now, and for things that have happened throughout most of 2024, is a lot of that regulatory infrastructure that everybody thought was going to be in place seems to have eroded and evaporated. Like the strong market controls that were in place during the Democratic administration seem to be flipping a different direction, with a lot of things that have happened at the SEC with Gary Gensler, and now into the regime change. We see things like Ripple being normalized. I don't know that she is in as good of a position as it was. If it would have been much tighter in a regulatory fashion, I think the story about Chia being regulatory compliant was stronger. But now that things seem to be more loose, and that we're following this trend of what happened with Uber, where Uber just flaunted the whole taxi infrastructure and all the regulations related to taxis. And they just were like, whatever, we're just gonna flout the law, and eventually the law will catch up and will just let us do what we're doing. That seems like what has happened with a lot of the crypto industry. Some people got prosecuted, some people definitely got taken to the cleaners for things that they did under the old regime and the old rules, but the rules seem to be relaxing. So I think Chia is in a position to being close to the government because of the conversations they've had, because of the way that Gene has the ability to get into the right rooms. I mean, you definitely don't see other minor altcoins in the room at the same time as the rest of these. So if you look at who is at the table at these crypto task force meetings, it's big players and Chia. So is Chia going to be one of the big players? I hope so. I think it's the right chain for a lot of stuff. It's really, when I get asked, hey, should I use blockchain, or can I use blockchain in a particular application, it's hard for me not to think Chia first as the one that you should be thinking about using. Because if you're going to build something, it's really hard to contemplate building inside of a chain like Ethereum or Solana or something else, because of a variety of reasons. So I think it is a place to build real world applications and do stuff. And I think that their positioning within the SEC and government is better positioned than a lot. But if the regulatory infrastructure is getting much more relaxed, and none of these rules about the Howey test make any sense anymore, because we're going to have a new regulatory regime under which this stuff happens, then that message, I think, is weakened for Chia. But I still think that it's a good chain, and them being at the table is a very positive thing. And I think it likely is the reason for the bump in the price of Chia. Is a lot of people are hearing about Chia for the first time. They're like, why is this minor altcoin here at the table with the likes of Ripple?
I likewise, I'm glad that Chia has engaged in a dialogue with the government. It's important to do, and that is maybe a departure from some of the ethos behind Bitcoin, which it has emulated so strongly. But And I think also a comparison to Uber and the disruptiveness of the sharing economy movement and what that brought to entrenched power players and the regulatory environment is a great comparison. I'm all for Chia, engaging in dialogue, trying to follow the rules that have been laid out. But I am somewhat disheartened whenever I see uh, the Chia community and Chia leadership. Um, the article in Crypto News says calls out in the agenda the opposition to regulatory sandboxes, and that Chia argued that allowing projects to bypass established regulations could lead to systematic risks and encourage hasty token launches. That's the SEC problem. That's not Chia's problem, and I think that's part of the reason. Um, well, I should just say I think it turns off members in the crypto ecosphere that have already um, adopted and have some sort of loyalty to another blockchain. So I don't understand where that gets Chia. I think that we can have conversations or should be having conversations with the government about positive steps and moving forward and what their expectations are. But I'm equally happy to see other blockchains and other people testing those limits and testing that regulation because um, uh, I believe in the adversarial, not the inquisitorial system, and that's what the adversarial world looks like. But anyway, enough of my.
Maybe just to drive this point a little bit more. So if you just search for crypto task force, right? How often do you see, I mean, other than our boy Slowest Time Lord being in the mix here, but like you just don't see a lot of Chia being referenced. I mean, that's just in a nutshell. I mean, you see that this is being covered quite a bit. And in some places it's being called out by our community. But if you look outside of our community, outside of the Chia community, you don't see Chia being highlighted. You just see like a lot of other discussions about like what's going on with the crypto task force. So it's interesting that there is a community that it is very pro Chia. But outside of that, that's what I was trying to say is they're hearing about it for the first time and is not highlighted. And I think that there's been some chatter about why these guys are there. And so it's the world starting to wake up to Chia. And I think that when Permuto launches in earnest and this starts happening in a real way, I think it is kind of the Terra Luna moment. If you think about what happened with Terra Luna, it sort of sat there and didn't do anything until they had Anchor and Mirror and a whole bunch of other products that sort of made the whole ecosystem functional and doing things in a financial sense. So, as far as when I say the Terra Luna moment, there was a moment where that was the darling of the crypto world, and it was because there was something happening there that was really exciting and it was interesting. I think that moment is going to happen for Chia, and it's going to happen when Permuto launches and you start to have the trading and carbon in one market really comes to fruition. I think that that's later this year. So, for the people that are looking for when is Chia going to sort of come into its own, when could this happen? It would be if these things go off the way that Gene's talking about, then it could be really exciting time in Chia. We're just before that, and if this is the calm before the storm, then that's what we're looking at. So this temporary inversion, I think it's because we're starting to get some people waking up to Chia and they're looking at it and they're saying, hey, I could get into that. And it really wouldn't take much to move the Chia market in a pretty big way. And we've seen that. That's what I was trying to point out with the chart, is that this stuff has happened in the past. We've seen Chia go through some parts where, like, I mean, this was a pretty substantial rip. I mean, look at this. We were down at 12 and we ripped up 3x or so. That's a big rip. These things have occurred in the past, and if we zoomed out a bit, this run up to 50 was pretty substantial. But we keep seeing reversions to this kind of downward trend of where Chia quote unquote should be. And that quote unquote should be is something around $10, $11 if there isn't sustained block demand. So once we see that sustained block demand, I think you're going to start to see the chart go in a substantially different direction. But until you see that kind of stuff happening, I think all of the stuff that's going on is still to come, even with the gaming stuff. I believe when we talked to Art about that, he thought the launch of gaming would be mid-year. And so if we're something on the tune of end of Q1 here, I think that coming out in Q2 seems entirely likely. And it may drive some additional excitement around what's going on with Chia. But we did have a gaming launch before. If you recall, we had a card game that was launched, and it had its moment in the sun and then quietly faded away.
Yeah. Back to Bermuda. Let's we talk about Chia trading, but no, let's
You
go
don't
back.
want to talk about Gia the card game? Come on.
No, I don't want to talk about Chia the card game. That's the no, I don't. Let's talk about Bermuda, because the rip in November, I think that has had a lot to do with the expectations about Bermuda. I really I really like. I was impressed with the what I believe is foresight in the idea between splitting the stock certificates, the use of a trust. I absolutely love those aspects. I heard, and I wondered if you know any of the details of. I heard that Bermuda might have another product in the work, and I may have heard it from you. I may have heard it from somebody else. Honestly, I can't remember, but it was mentioned to me at some point. We haven't had a chance to discuss it. Are you aware of any of the details about a second product coming from Bermuda?
I only saw like a cryptic mention of this, and I think it was Gene Hoffman that said it, where he said, "I think we did it again. We came up with another thing, and that was about all that there was." So, I think it's great that like the gears are turning, and oftentimes that's what happens when you start working on whatever. You think about what else you might do, and even if you listen to some of the discussions that were happening around Bermuda and prior to Bermuda, when there was a lot of speculation about what is this thing that they're talking about? What is Gene and Trent so excited about? There was a lot of other discussion about what it could be, what other things might be going on, and so I'm not at all surprised to hear that there's going to be ancillary follow-on things that they think that can be done, because when you start looking at the regulatory infrastructure under which even Bermuda was launched, there may be other things that they thought of. These are smart guys that are kicking around ideas, that are really thinking about ways to use blockchain technology in a substantive way. Everything that had to do with options trading in this world was very exciting to me. I started saying, how do you do shorts? How do you do options in this kind of a world? I wouldn't at all be surprised if it's something to do with that, because options trading slash futures market slash some sort of a shorting infrastructure would be very interesting in this whole tokenized stock trading world. I know that you're really thinking that this is kind of a Trojan horse and a way to get stock trading directly into the world of blockchain, and it certainly looks like it, because if you think about those appreciation certificates that Bermuda is going to be issuing that are divorced from the dividend, that is stock trading, in its purest form on the blockchain, which is exciting in and of itself. So yeah, I think it's probably something to do with options, futures markets, and or some kind of shorting slash debt, interactions with Circuit DAO. And I think it's probably also why Circuit DAO delayed and hasn't released, because they're thinking about how do they make sure that everything can work in this new world, when we've got a collateralized stable coin.
So, and then also, I think the last thing that I think about as we think about Chia price and what the future looks like, tariffs were enacted today by Trump, and world trade will be impacted. The United States markets, and again, going back to Bermuda's splitting of stock, the stock certificates. I think that was with an eye towards some of these things that had been talked about. People didn't necessarily believe that this was the direction that the government was going to be moving, but it's real and it's here, and this is going to have very large effects on the broader economy. And um, and this could be an inflection point for turning to different technologies like blockchain, like smaller settlement windows. So exciting to see all of that happen. Anything else that you want to mention before we close it out?
Nope. I just kind of wanted to have a discussion about price and what does it mean to have that inversion, and how long was it really going to last. And I think now that we're starting to see the entire equities market and crypto continuously facing sell pressure, it didn't last. It's already gone. So here today, gone tomorrow. That's the nature of volatile style assets. And it's not to say that it's necessarily a bad thing that things can go up and go down, because savvy traders can take advantage of both. But yeah, I'm looking for the day where we've got the real world use cases launched on Chia in effect, sustained usage, and that the products are being used in a real world way. The first salvo for that on Chia is the carbon markets. And now we're going to see stock trading. So those two things coming together with gaming, I think it's an exciting 2025, but it's probably Q3, Q4 when we really see this stuff start to hit. So we're in the lull before the real rip that's going to happen, and that's if the most aggressive timelines stay fixed. Because sometimes these things take a little longer. So it might be that 2026 is the real year of Chia, but I'm hoping it's 2025. Honestly, I think it seems like they're set up for it. So we're watching for the launch of these big things on Chia.
I can't believe you just said 2026. I don't know if I can wait that long. It's going to be. I'm praying for 2025 and an early 2025.
I'm just a realist, man. I know how long it takes to build things and get things on board, and this one's waiting on some kind of regulatory something. I don't know the particulars of what they need to have happen, but you have a regime change and you have a new way of thinking about things, and sometimes it takes a little bit longer to get things done than you anticipated. So I know everybody's excited, but sometimes if you have things that must happen before, sometimes those things that must happen before take a little longer. I know there was a lot of excitement about the IPO. We've been talking about that for years now, and still hasn't happened. I think that Bermuda is probably the thing that has to happen before the IPO. So I really thought we'd be seeing an IPO by this point, but I think the IPO could be as far out as 2027 at this point.
Okay. And that's enough. That's enough. I don't want to cry on air. I think it'll be sooner than that. And
I hope so.
Knock
I
on
hope
wood,
so.
cross my fingers.
Yes, I'm also hope springs eternal with you here. I'm just trying to be realistic, but I want to see this stuff happen in at least Q3, Q4 of 2025. That's not that far away, actually. That's only a few months away. Like, I know it seems like it's a lot of time, but things take time to build, and there's a bit to do here from a development perspective, a relative regulatory perspective, and also just like amassing the customers and the liquidity. They said that they were going to get what, $5 billion, and that's how they wanted to launch. They got to go out and collect that up.
All right.
Work to do.
Okay. Well, we'll see you tomorrow.
All right. See ya.